It is, of course, the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Rotus Odiri, we're in Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital. Welcome to the Arise News Station. We're going to cross live to Washington, D.C. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he's a busy man. He was in Beverly Hills, California yesterday for the Milken Institute Global Conference. And now here he is in Washington, D.C. taking questions from the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Financial Services. Let's take a listen.
My second question, who said it, Schumer or Trump, that tariffs are vital to protect American workers, American manufacturers, American innovation, and our national security? Who said it, Trump or Schumer?
I would imagine it was the ranking member.
It was the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, said it. And like what you said, it was cool until Trump got in office, and now he's opposed to it. My time is about to expire, Mr. Secretary, but I want to commend you for fighting for American middle-class workers. I do think that extending the tax bill with a couple of tweaks like SALT is important. I do think that fighting for our middle-class workers are important. I implore you to stay on the right path, sir.
Good. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you for getting that SALT plug in, Mr. Lalota, twice. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Secretary Bessent. I wanted to ask you some questions about the reports that the administration is cutting IRS workforce roughly in half with a goal of 50,000, including many of the frontline enforcement positions. A recent study concluded that this would result in a loss of $19 billion in foregone revenue just in 2026 and up to $350 billion over the next decade. Such substantial cuts in staffing could cause reductions in voluntary compliance as taxpayers will feel emboldened to cheat on their taxes. And an IRS official previously testified that a simple 1% decline in the compliance rate translates into $30 billion in lost revenue for the government. If the administration is truly concerned about reducing the federal deficit, as you indicate, why would it consider staffing reductions that reduce the IRS's capacity to collect much-needed revenue that could be used to reduce the deficit or pay for critical services? A recent Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration's report indicates that the IRS compliance workforce would be drastically hit 31%, with revenue officers 18%. They are paying the maximum taxpayer compliance responsibilities that are needed for revenue for the government. It appears that 31% of the reduction in force, and I think since January, the federal workforce has been reduced, and IRS started out with 103,000, and now it's down to 91,600, which is an 11% reduction in the workforce. That's 31% loss in revenue agents, 18% loss in revenue officers, 10% loss in contact representatives, and 10% loss in tax examiners. It seems to be really, really foolish to pursue that. Can you tell me why that makes sense? Briefly.
Sir, so I think there are two things here. There's the actual decrease that you just cited, which is about 11%. And then if you could tell me where you're getting this number that there's going to be a 40 or 50.
The IG's report.
Sorry?
The IG's report.
There's going to be a 40 or 50% decrease because, sir, I will tell you.
That was the goal.
Before I took this job, I didn't particularly like the term fake news. Now that I have it, I think it's probably not strong enough. Okay, because on March 22nd,
let me change the subject. Let me move to another subject, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. Mm-hmm. If you want to elaborate, you can. You can send us.
I'll be happy to have my office.
Let me say that since this administration has come to the White House, the price of groceries has increased by 0.5% in only 2 months. According to a recent report by the Groundwork Collective, the price of meat, poultry, fish, and eggs has grown the fastest, up 2.9% since January of 2025. Eggs at a record high of $6.23 a dozen, up from 26% in January 25 alone. What is the administration doing to bring down the cost of food? What is the administration doing to ensure that the impact of the tariffs don't disproportionately fall on our nation's farmers? I've got a list of headlines from farmers all across the country that are complaining about the impact of the tariffs on their capacity to sell their products. Can you tell me what the administration is doing to bring down the cost of food?
Well, a couple of things, Congressman. First of all, you may or may not know I am a farmer. Secondly, that we inherited a momentum. Food prices, like monetary policy, have long and variable lead times. The price of eggs was up substantially during the Biden administration. It has been brought down 52% in the past few months. And
it just went up the last 2 months. I just told you.
No, sir, I think that's not 100%.
Since January.
And finally, we are
6%.
We are bringing down energy cost, and energy cost, transportation is one of the single biggest factors in food pricing. So diesel prices across the country have come down, and that will result in lower food prices.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Edwards, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being with us this afternoon. Earlier this year, I co-sponsored a bill, the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act, that would prevent the Federal Reserve from issuing central bank digital currency. Many of the folks that I represent are concerned about the security of such a currency and the privacy of their information were such a currency to be used. Can you give me your perspective and maybe the administration's perspective on the place for digital currency?
Sir, we believe that digital assets belong in the private sector. And my personal view is that having a central bank digital currency is a sign of weakness, not strength, because really the reason, if there is a reserve, say a reserve manager or a foreign central bank holds US dollars, then there is a wide variety of US assets they can invest in. You would create a central bank digital currency just for ease of use because there are no good choices for underlying assets.
And so you're saying you would not be in favor of the Federal Reserve issuing such a currency?
No, sir.
Thank you. Can you tell us real quick, at what point do you believe that our debt levels would no longer be sustainable? And then as the second part of that is, what would that look like? If our debt were no longer sustainable, what would that look like to the American family? We talk a lot about debt up here. We put forth some elaborate graphs and charts, and we hear all kind of economists using big, long words. I need to be able to describe to the people back at home what that might look like in their lives were we no longer sustainable.
Well, it would look like a sudden stop in the economy as the credit would disappear, as markets would lose confidence. And I'm committed to that not happening. And again, it is a tipping point in debt sustainability is very difficult to pinpoint, but what is not difficult to pinpoint is a trajectory. And the trajectory is unsustainable when and if the markets were to rebel against is very difficult to know. I think, just as I talked about the warning track for the X date, I think it's very important not to go on the warning track, and we've got to get to the other side of this and start reducing the debt. And the debt numbers are indeed scary, but the Secretary Yellen and I both agree that it is the debt to GDP that is the important number. So we are trying to both control the absolute level of debt, pay it down, but also grow the GDP.
And so I applaud your approach towards the debt. Give us an idea of where is that tipping point? How close do you think that we might be to that?
Again, sir, I think what the market, having been in markets for 35 or 40 years, what the market is more concerned about is a trajectory. Are you on a trajectory that is unsustainable, or are you, as we said during COVID, bending the curve? So the goal here is to both bend the curve, but to grow the denominator and use growth and spending constraint to solve this problem.
And thank you for that. And as part of the president's cabinet and seeing more inside what's taking place than any of the rest of us, what role would you say that DOGE is playing right now in prolonging that tipping point and reversing our fiscal trend?
Well, I think DOGE or any other measure to constrain the spending is admirable, important, and necessary. And if we don't do that, as I've said, ranking member, they have mentioned it, we do not have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem, and we have to bring this spending under control.
Thank you. I've got just a few seconds. Can you tell us what keeps you up at night regarding cyber threats to our Treasury system?
Well, it's cyber threats across the entire financial system, sir. And that's why at Treasury, we are leading the effort for more resilience within the entire financial system, whether it's across the banking system, the payment system, and the Treasury system. As you would have seen, Treasury was hacked last year. We've just discovered an OCC hack that discovered last year. So these hacks are real and dangerous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll yield.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mrs. DeLauro, for any questions that she may have for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for being late, and apologies to you, Mr. Secretary, but lots of hearings happening here. So just a couple of points, and I want to ask my question. It's just a follow-up on this IRS piece. I think it's very interesting that, well, first of all, I totally disagree with you, Mr. Secretary. We have a revenue problem, and that's where the IRS comes in. And we think about the debt. We think about the $2.3 trillion that was the debt really built up with the tax cuts to the wealthiest and the biggest corporations in 2017. We're now looking at an additional $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, which are making their way to, again, the richest and to the biggest corporations. That is debt. And that is something that I don't know about yourself and others in the administration who refuse to see that kind of debt. And the almost unbelievable piece of this is the IRS 2024. We invested in it, able to recover more than $1.1 billion from roughly 1,600 millionaires. Projected at the time that investments in high-end enforcement data and analytics that an additional $851 billion would result in revenue over the next 10 years. The Inspector General has said IRS lost 30% of auditors under Elon Musk's illegal purge. People who are wanting to ensure that millionaires and billionaires are paying their taxes. And the issue is that we're going to pay for those taxes by taking it out of the hide of Medicaid and of children, of low-wage workers, and of seniors. The issue that I want to try to get to, I'm going to make another point, is your comments on your recent comments that seem to call into question the vitality of the textile industry in the United States and national security. I applaud the administration for the steps they've taken on de minimis and closing down that loophole. I think it was very, very important to do this. We need to go further. It needs to be applied to all countries, not just to China. But unbelievable commentary on the U.S. textile industry provides good jobs across this country, particularly in rural areas. The supply chain directly employed 471,000 workers, produced roughly $64 billion in product in 2024. let me get to my question with only 2 minutes to go here. This is the dealing with standing up for a mechanism in the U.S. to screen our investments in China to ensure capital, technology, and know-how are not fueling the capabilities of the Chinese Communist Party. I've had a bipartisan bill to do that for years, helped negotiate the bipartisan bill that nearly passed last year, and I strongly support executive action to address the issue. In fact, we got appropriated funding for Treasury to implement the executive order on outbound investment. Mr. Secretary, I understand that the administration is currently reviewing the executive order. There's a clear bipartisan consensus on the need for an outbound mechanism of that screening regime. Let me ask you, do you support the implementation of such a regime?
Thank you, Congressman. This is a very important issue. The outbound security program is an important new tool in our effort to restrict the PRC from exploiting U.S. investment. The program just began a few months ago, and we are learning and we anticipate gaining important visibility into U.S. persons' investments involving PRC entities. We appreciate the interest from Congress, and while legislation is important and helpful, I would like some time for our process to inform any legislation. We would like any legislation to be both flexible and durable.
Well, in your confirmation hearing in January, you noted, and this is a quote, we should have a very rigorous screening process for U.S. investments in key sectors that could go to China. And in March, you said, we will make sure that our outbound investment doesn't get used against us. We are going to continue investigating this and where necessary to block it. I heard your answer, and quite frankly, it sounds a little bit wishy-washy. I want to be clear about this. You have expressed support for outbound investment for months now. Has that changed in any way? What's the status of the administration's review of that order? What about the timeline on this, because it's an important issue? And can you commit that your department will enforce this executive order to its fullest extent? I
have not changed my position. As I said, we are looking at what is working, what isn't, and how the best enforcement mechanisms. And when a bill comes forward, again, we want it to be fulsome and durable, and a 2025 bill for all the nuance that goes with this.
Well, I'm out of time, but please understand, we have bipartisan support. It made it into the continuing resolution, but for the influence of Mr. Musk, and it is critically important for our competitive edge. And I don't believe there's any reason for the administration to roll back. My hope is that we will move forward and keep the pressure on in order to be able to preserve our competitive advantage and not cede to the Chinese.
So we're in complete agreement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would not want to interfere with that bipartisan moment.
Okay. And it's bipartisan legislation, as you know.
I appreciate that.
Great piece of legislation.
And the chair will now recognize the gentleman from Nevada, Mark Amade, for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Mr. Secretary. First of all, I want to thank you for your availability during this time since you've been confirmed and stuff like that. I know nothing's been going on that affects the Treasury Department in any way, and I appreciate having access to you via phone over an issue that wasn't important. So, thank you very much. I want to just ask you a couple of questions, kind of relative to our conversation, and that is, I know that the president has said quit producing the penny. A lot of reasons, arguably you lose 2.5+ cents for every penny you produce in signerage, and you don't have to get up too early to do the math on that sort of thing. But I think in the timing of doing that, if we're going to eliminate the penny, which has to happen here, I would like to know who it is, who's kind of the tip of the spear on your staff at Treasury. I already have the Mint information, but at Treasury, as far as those issues go, and I'll tell you why I want to know is, I think there are some issues regarding what it costs to produce a penny. I don't know if it's going to get you, I don't think it'll get you down to a cent. So it won't be that argument. But quite frankly, stacked up behind it is what it costs to produce a nickel and what it costs to produce a dime. I don't know about the quarter, but anyhow, to make sure that we are at least giving your department and the Bureau of the Mint the most tools necessary to, if you will, untie their hands when they're looking for who they buy their blanks from and stuff like that, that goes directly into what it costs to produce one. So my first question is, who's kind of in charge of that, since I know you've got other things to do, but ultimately, so that we can start that dialogue with where do we go from here, and if we're going to get rid of, and I know there's been legislation introduced in the Senate to get rid of the penny altogether except for collectors. So who's the point man or woman on your staff?
Congressman, it would be my recently confirmed deputy, Mike Faulkner.
Okay.
And I would also say with the nickel and the dime, the nickel costs more than a nickel to produce, but we are looking at material changes in the materials that would reduce the cost to or below a nickel. And then I believe the dime is profitable.
And I guess that brings me to there is legislation you might want to warn your recently confirmed deputy. HR 1278, bipartisan, gives you guys the chance, without coming to us every time, to basically make changes in the metal of that sort of stuff so that you can keep ahead of those sorts of things. So if you would, unless it's sitting here, whatever, it's like, hey, we're going to be calling you up. The idea is to solve the problem, if it's solvable, and move on from there so you guys can do other things with your time.
Yes, sir. We've been reviewing that.
Good. Glad to hear that. So have you taken a look at the Senate bill that says no more pennies? And I guess other countries have rounded up to the nearest 5 cents. And my research says, well, it wasn't the end of the world. So
well, sir, we are also encouraging rounding down.
Okay, that's good. Great answer. You know what? I'm going to reward good performance. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly appreciate that, Mr. Amade. I understand you have the hard stop at 11:30. I'd like to honor that. I want to be fair to my fellow committee members, though. In doing so, not all of us will be eligible for a second round, but certainly my ranking member, Mr. Hoyer, would request that he have a chance to ask you another question before the stop.
Mr. Secretary, first of all, let me say that I believe the Congress is being taken for granted in the policies being pursued. I think, frankly, some illegal things are being done, not by you, I'm just talking about the administration, in terms of federal employees. I represent 77,000 federal employees who came here to work for the government. That's why they're here. I've worked very well with Republicans throughout my career, which is now in its 45th year. I want to do that some more because I think that's the best interest of the country. I believe you're one of those who has a shot at keeping us on a somewhat even keel. I mean that as a compliment, but obviously it's also a concern. When you say, and I want to reiterate this, that we have a spending problem, and I retort to you, no, what we have is a paying for problem. If I make $1 million, I can spend $999,000 less taxes. But if I make $500,000, I spend $1 million. That is a paying problem because I don't pay for it and I accumulate debt. That's how debt goes. Now, I was here in the Reagan administration some period of time ago. We were told that the tax cuts that were passed in 1981 were going to pay for themselves. They did not. Perhaps will surprise you, maybe you know this figure. The largest increase in the national debt was under Ronald Reagan, the only president who had a triple-digit, 189% increase in the national debt during the course of his term. It might also surprise you that Clinton is the only one who was 30% or lower since Ronald Reagan. Clinton is the only one who balanced the budget. Now, one of the reasons we did so is because we had bipartisan objectives. Republicans wanted to cut taxes, which is their mantra, and we wanted to invest, as we call it, as opposed to spending, in children's education and people's health care, in safety, et cetera, et cetera. If we continue this logic that we have a spending problem and discount taxes as spending, when we did the tax increase under in 2017, you may recall, the Republicans gave themselves a $1.5 trillion headroom. The reason it was limited to that is because the senator from Tennessee wouldn't go higher than that. So in other words, a $1.5 trillion unpaid for headroom to give a tax cut. That is spending because you're cutting prices while increasing costs. That's what causes deficits. Some of my Republican friends, I'm a strong supporter of national defense, but I do not delude myself that raising $150 billion in national defense expenses don't cost taxes. We don't have $150 billion to either cut taxes with or to spend money with. So we borrow. And when my friend talks about hypocrisy, we all know if you spend more than you get, you go into debt. And that's what we do as a country on both sides of the aisle. And we need people like yourself to be honest with those with whom you work and honest with the Congress of the United States in terms of the ramifications of the actions. I know you are a strong supporter of permanent increase. You're not a strong supporter of paying for it. And you can cut all of non-defense discretionary spending and you won't get there. And this game that Mr. Musk has played, he had no sense of the ramifications of the actions he's taken. He knew how to do it. He was prepared. As one article in the Atlantic Journal said, the blitzkrieg, which our speaker calls flooding the zone, been pretty effective at that, just trying to watch where the ball is and see if you can respond. But Mr. Secretary, I have a lot of questions. I'm going to send them to you, ask them to you, and would like to take some time with you on that. I have great respect for your background and your abilities. And I am really praying that you will bring a voice of reason and rationality to our deliberations. My time is over, and I appreciate the chairman's forbearance. But this is serious business. Very serious business. And I agree with you. A $37 trillion debt is not sustainable. And we all have to do it, but we have to do it together. That's the only way it will get done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You have a response, Mr. Secretary?
Congressman, thank you for that. And I would note that while President Reagan substantially increased the defense budget, the Clinton administration was able to capitalize on the peace dividend. But as you said, the defense budget dropped dramatically post the fall of the Iron Curtain, which contributed to the fiscal soundness. And through, as you said, through bipartisanship, working with Speaker Gingrich, they worked together. So I would hope that we could do that again.
Which, by the way, cost Gingrich's job. The right wing of his party was incensed that he did that. And what it did was had a rational policy because both sides participated.
So, The senator from Tennessee is actually my neighbor, so I see him quite often. And look, there are ramifications here. And
You're not talking about any current senators from Tennessee. He's left.
no, I know.
Yeah, okay.
Senator
I want to
Corker.
make sure we had the right Tennessean.
Senator Corker.
Yes.
Yes, is my neighbor.
Uh-huh.
So, and I look forward to inviting a bipartisan solution.
Thank you, sir. And with that, our time is concluded. I'd like to thank you, Secretary Bessent, for being here today. There may be some members, as Ranking Member Hoyer has indicated, who have questions. We're going to submit those questions for the record. And we ask any of you to please submit those questions to the subcommittee staff within the next 7 days.
All right, that's, of course, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent testifying for the U.S. House Appropriations Subcommittee, touching on a number of pressing issues in the United States, from fiscal, pretty much fiscal, in terms of trying to cut the debt and also cutting, spending, and a number of other issues that were raised there, including a very testy exchange with the congressman from Wisconsin who asked him who pays for tariffs, and Scott Bessent refusing to answer, saying it's a complicated question.